Welcome to another episode of the Split Screen Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Garcia, aka KCCHRISG. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the show. Whether you're a new listener or a listener that's been around for a little while, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the love and the support. The last episode did pretty good for not having intro music. I'm still figuring out a bunch of things for the show, so please bear with me. But in the meantime, we're going to keep doing this thing, and I'm having a blast making these again, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So without further ado, I want to discuss a topic today that is near and dear to my heart, for one, and for two, it was suggested by a listener, a good buddy of mine. His name is Nate Thompson. I appreciate you, brother. He's been a fan since day one, and couldn't do it without you, man. So I appreciate your input on what you want me to talk about next. If you have any suggestions on what you want me to discuss in another episode, please let me know on Twitter at SplitScreenKC, Instagram at SplitScreenKC, and if you want to follow the page on Facebook, it is on there as well, Split Screen Podcast. Give it a follow, and I would love to hear your comments on things like that. But today we're going to be discussing some original soundtrack, but just soundtracks in general. I know I've done this before, but I didn't really go into depth as to why they're sort of important. If I'm going to make sense, I don't know, but I want to discuss it anyway. So let's get into this. We're going to talk about some of the factors that go into making an outstanding game to begin with. One of which, the most important thing is gameplay, right? It's going to be at the forefront of any development team, aside from profits. And gameplay is what makes or breaks the game. So it's the primary selling point of any game, right? It's the reason we put our hard-earned cash on the line towards these games, to have fun and to experience a gameplay formula that keeps us coming back for more, and in turn can potentially lead to us spending even more money towards this game and put it towards the studio and the publishers and things like that. The central gameplay mechanics are the bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes, if you will, of any game experience or any video game experience. So what else goes into making a great game? Some might say the world of the game that you're going to be sinking your precious time and hours into. Others might say something along the lines of making the story have depth and real emotion to keep us invested in the characters and in the journey that we're going with these main characters on. I don't know if I worded that correctly. I don't know if that was grammatically correct, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm saying. And the thing about going back to the gameplay is, what kind of gameplay do you want? That will, not everybody is going to be in the same market, right? Some people want to be, something simple, laid back, like, what's that game? A Little to the Left. I've been into that game a lot lately. Or do you want something more of, action, over the top kind of mission level design? Or do you want something with customization options for your character, for maximizing your skill trees? Or do you want to go on something that has a ton of side quests, a ton of main story missions, and so on and so forth? There's so many gameplay formulas that a developer can follow. But at the core of every video game is just make sure that it's fun. It doesn't matter what kind of gameplay style it is. Just make sure it's fun. That's all we ask, right? As video game players, we just want to have a good time. These are our escapes from the real world, and we just want to have fun. And we want to make sure that it's well worth the money that we're spending. So, it depends on, who you ask. people might have different answers for that question. There is no wrong answer. All of these things are hopefully focused on in some capacity to ensure that the final product that gets released is one that the developers can be proud of, and one that us as the consumers will be willing to spend our money on and spend a significant amount of time playing, with the hope of an experience that we're going to keep coming back for. So what does this have to do with soundtracks? Well, I'm here to tell you that is another essential ingredient that I won't say is overlooked. I mean, maybe a little, but I wanted to bring attention to it because soundtracks are just another ingredient in the recipe that makes a great game. Whether it's an original soundtrack or a soundtrack full of licensed music, they both can benefit the game and enhance the game in a variety of ways. I want to ask someone about the importance of a soundtrack to them, and they kind of just shrugged it off. And I asked a bunch of people at my work and outside of work, people that I knew personally, and while they had some soundtracks in mind that sort of stuck out to them, they didn't really they didn't go as far as to say that they fully appreciated what the soundtrack did for the game, and some of them didn't necessarily think of the bigger picture when it came to everything being cohesive in terms of gameplay, in terms of world building and design, and the effect that the music had on the player while they were playing the game. So I want to discuss the benefits of a soundtrack and some of my some of my favorite soundtracks that I grew up with and that I still listen to this day. So, as in movies and TV shows, along with plays and stage production, and more than that, obviously, a video game soundtrack amplifies what the audience, or in this case, the players, should feel, right? Just like in a movie, for instance, Avengers Endgame, the soundtrack to that, especially at the very end of the movie, really, really stuck with me and drove that feeling of sorrow home. And that's the case in video games. If you're already feeling that way while playing your video game, the music will serve to really reinforce and drive that emotion home. It adds gravity to the scene or to the level. And that's the beauty of music. That's why I always say music is one of the very few things that all of humanity can relate to in some form or fashion. And that's why music is so important. So you feel a certain way when you hear, the banging of the drums, when you take your first foray into the jungles of DK Island in Donkey Kong Country, or the somber, melancholy tone of the menu music of Halo 2 that gives me the message of like the song is dedicated to all of the Marines and just humanity in general, that their lives have been lost in this war, and it's just dedicated to those fallen soldiers. Along with I also get a message of, the Covenant, they found Earth, and it's not going to be pretty. So they're literally going to hit home in this game, and that's kind of the message that I always got from the Halo 2 menu music. And let's not forget, this one's for you, Nate. I've listened to it I don't know how many times, but let's not forget about that enchanting feeling that you probably do get, and if you don't, I I don't know what's wrong with you. You get when you explore Atlantis in Banjo-Tooie. It really is the perfect example of taking a setting and painting a picture of it through a different medium. And in this case, it's the music that plays from this level. It's so iconic, and you associate it immediately with this level in Banjo-Tooie. It's just amazing. It's just a beautiful piece. And of course, I know a bunch of my friends and relatives, and I'm sure you will too, will appreciate this one. I can't make this episode without mentioning the Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 soundtracks, from Live and Learn to City Escape to it doesn't actually I don't think it doesn't matter was made by Crush 40, but those two songs and a couple of more were made by Crush 40, so shout out to those guys. To the original soundtracks for like Mystic Ruins and The Green Jungle, White Forest, Twinkle Park, The Egg Carrier, Station Square, all of those songs. So good, right? And all of the songs in the levels give you that rush of adrenaline, at least they do for me, that you would probably feel if you were in Sonic and Shadow's shoes, no pun intended. And just to be honest, those songs or those soundtracks are bangers, front to back. But wait, Chris, all banger soundtracks don't have to be OSTs or original soundtracks. There are plenty of games that use licensed music in their soundtracks, right? I mean, the first game that I think of, or a couple of games that I think of, are Need for Speed Underground, both the first and the second game. Those soundtracks are perfect. They have, the rap / R&B vibe for the menu music, but when you're racing and driving around the city, you've got rock and you've got some techno, you even got some new metal in there. So they do a fantastic job with those soundtracks, along with Grand Theft Auto, whether that's the 80s themed soundtrack in Vice City to San Andreas to GTA 4 and 5. They're all bangers, front to back bangers. And of course, Guitar Hero 3, that the whole game is centered around the soundtrack, obviously. And one of my personal favorites, Madden 2005, because they have Chevelle in there, and you can't go wrong with Chevelle. So what I'm trying to say is all of these are true masterclasses of music selection to fit the vibe, to fit the tone, to fit the mood, and for the situation at hand. Whatever you're playing through, whatever the situation is, they've got the sound right. So I want you to try something when you have the time. I want you to find a game that you love to play or still love to play as a kid, and find a cutscene, find a level that had some sort of impact on you on an emotional level. And I want you to replay that level, and I want you to pay attention to the music, because maybe you didn't do this as a kid, and see if it makes a difference in your perspective on either the level or the cutscene. And another thing that you can try is turn off all of the music in the game that you want to play, and replay a level, replay a cutscene, whatever it is that left an impact on you, and see if it hits the same. Because I have done this. I did this in a lot of games that I've played, and it's just not the same. The world is not the same. It's not as enjoyable. Part of the soundtrack is just as important as level design sometimes, and especially in that N64 era for me personally. So I want you to try one of those two, or you can do both, and let me know what your experience was. Was it different? Do you care that the music is gone? Did you even notice that the music was still gone? I don't know. Everybody's experience is going to be different, and that's why I want to hear from you. So what's my point exactly? It's just music, right? Well, not exactly. My point is this. Music sets the atmosphere and the tone for the world that we're visiting in whatever game you're playing, right? It's sending us a message without the words to express it, if that makes sense. Music can build the world and the characters that inhabit said world, right? It can even tell you about a character's emotions and what maybe they're thinking or what they feel at the moment, along with what they've felt throughout their history. And even some musical cues will play at the very end of a game as a callback to how the journey started. And that, to me, will always be an interesting concept that is a lot of fun if you pick up on that as you play the game. But like I said, it can tell you about a character even without knowing anything about that character, right? If, some character, whether it's stereotypical or not, you get it, your grungy rock vibe, right? And you probably got a tough guy on your hands. You get something a little more complex and dark, you can tell that character's been through some shit before you're meeting him for the first time. You kind of get his story through his soundtrack. And sometimes the music speaks from the heart when the words can't. And it's just such a fascinating concept to me, how music can convey a message, even if it's just an instrumental message. Of course, it's going to portray a message through lyrics, but musical pieces can express just as much emotion as something through lyrics, right? So, some games I've played personally, though, can be okay without a soundtrack. Hell, some games can benefit from not having a soundtrack. I won't name names, but some soundtracks just don't hit. They ain't it. And if a soundtrack is executed well enough, it can just have that lasting impression on the player, and it can establish itself apart from competition. It can establish a sort of brand recognition, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't look at. That you enjoy a soundtrack for certain games, but you don't think about, when you hear that, you think of one particular game, right? Because it did that soundtrack so well that none of the others are really going to compare. So, for instance, I know it's cliche, I say it all the time, but everyone knows the Halo theme. And other games have incorporated the monk choir-ish type vibe to their games, but it all goes back to Halo because it hadn't been done before, at least in my knowledge, of course, which isn't all that deep. But Halo is the one. If it isn't the first one, it is the one that set the bar, and so nothing comes close to that, in my opinion, anymore, at least. And just like everyone knows 115. Everyone knows the Super Mario theme. All of these things are so recognizable because the soundtrack is so important. It plays such a huge role in these games. And it all comes back to recognition and branding. You hear those songs, you think of one thing, and that's the goal of most soundtracks, or at least that's what I think that the goal should be. You want to stand out. And so, I don't know. If I were to write a soundtrack, I'm aiming to really set myself apart. I don't want to do some cookie cutter stuff that I hear a lot of in games these days. Not to go on a rant, but our soundtrack really hasn't stuck out to me like a lot of them do in the older video game era, like in the Super Nintendo, in the Sega Genesis, N64, hell, even the 360 days. It seems like the cutoff for me personally to when I was really listening to newer soundtracks. Aside from Doom, I think everybody loves the Doom soundtrack. But the bottom line is that music serves many purposes, and it's a multi-use tool in a developer's toolbox that the sound team and the music team has to master and has to strive for perfection using, because it just serves to elevate a game and a gamer's experience. And so with every game and franchise that launches is another opportunity to reach an audience in a way that most soundtracks don't. And that is to listen to said soundtrack outside of the game itself, right? I've even gotten roasted for listening to soundtracks outside of the game. I mean, what's wrong with you people, right? I mean, my family, my friends, especially my girlfriend, knows that I do this because I'm always listening to something, whether it's from Pokemon, from Smash Brothers, from COD Zombies, from Kingdom Hearts, hell, even Tetris and Pac-Man. Like, all of these soundtracks are bangers, and they deserve to be treated as such. And so I do my due diligence, and I listen to these things on the daily, on the drive to work, from work, to the grocery store, whatever the case may be. I'm rocking game soundtracks all the time when I'm not blasting metal. So there are so many amazing soundtracks out there. I mean, I just named a few. I mean, you name your favorite soundtracks on my social media pages, and I will give them a listen. I mean, hopefully there are more amazing soundtracks on the horizon. The point I really wanted to drive home is just soundtracks are kind of going, I won't say by the wayside, but I think that with modern business practices, and this is not, I know all these artists really do try their hardest, but nothing to me has stood out like those older games. The only thing that's come relatively close, like I said, is the Doom soundtrack, maybe Black Ops Cold War, and the Halo multiplayer soundtrack in Infinite. But I'm sure I might get flamed for that. I'm sure there's a lot of games that are coming out that I haven't even played yet that have amazing soundtracks. So this is where I want you to come in. Let me know what your favorite soundtracks are, whether it's old, new, whatever the case may be. Let me know what your favorite soundtracks are. I'd love to listen to them. And let me know a cutscene or a level that had a song in it that left a lasting impression on you as a gamer, and how that keeps you connected not only to that franchise, but just it keeps you coming back for more. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that, and that's all I really wanted to discuss in this episode. I know I kind of took it a little bit different than what Nate suggested, but music is just so important in my life, and I want to hear your opinion on the millions of soundtracks that have been released throughout gaming history, and I want to know your favorite. I want to know what you think is what makes a good soundtrack for all the games that you've played. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Again, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our Facebook is Split Screen Podcast, and the Twitter and Instagram is SplitScreenKC. If you feel like following my personal pages or to send some hate mail or some love, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KCCHRISG. And I think that's it. I wanted this to be like 15 minutes, but it ended up being about 25, and I do apologize. But anyway, it's been a pleasure talking with you and venting, I guess, a little bit. And let me know what other topics you want me to discuss. It doesn't have to be video games all the time. We could talk just pop culture in general, whether it's the MCU or anything really. But we'd like to focus on video games primarily here. But I'm open to suggestion, whatever you want. I'll talk about anything. So let me know. I would love to hear your feedback. Let me know how I can improve the show as well. And I'm going to shut up now. So thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, evening, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. I hope you're having a great time. I will see you in the next episode.